There is an abundance of research over the past 2 decades that has examined the relationship between school connections and suicide prevention. Recently, a meta-analysis of the literature on school connectedness and suicide prevention was conducted by Marisa and Breyer in 2017. We will now take a closer look at what this research found and its implications for our practice in the schools. We have the unique opportunity here to interview the primary researcher, Marisa, who is presently an assistant professor of school psychology at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. She conducted this research when she was completing a postdoctoral research fellowship at Brown University. Marisa first became interested in the idea of connectedness based on some of the work she completed with me on the Connections Project here in Rhode Island when she was a practicum student at the University of Rhode Island. She was also drawn to the field of school psychology to connect with students because it seemed the best way to use her psychological expertise towards improving outcomes for kids. As her clinical focus turned towards helping adolescents in crisis, she became especially interested in fostering school connections as a protective mechanism against suicide. Throughout graduate school, Marisa worked with adolescents in both school and hospital settings, many of whom were reporting school-related concerns. For her, the importance of school connectedness for these high-risk kids became crystal clear.
The idea that connectedness in general can serve as a protective factor against suicidal thoughts and behaviors has been widely studied. Connectedness to parents, family, peers, school, and community have all shown promise for mitigating risk or protecting kids from suicidal urges. In order to better understand how school connectedness can protect against suicide in both general populations and perhaps clinical populations, we conducted the first systematic meta-analysis of school connectedness and suicide, in which we pulled results from previous studies and pulled them together to account for these kinds of variations. Since this investigation was a meta-analysis, we searched for as many studies reporting on the relationship between school connectedness and suicide that we could find. We calculated a measure of each study's effect size, which is simply the size or magnitude of the effect, and then we pulled all of these together to come up with one average effect size across studies. We identified 19 publications that included 16 samples with nearly 200,000 participants. And taken together, we found that the relationship between school connectedness and suicide was significant. So this means that students reporting a connection to school were about half as likely to report experiencing suicidal thoughts or making a suicide attempt. So one of the most important takeaways from this study is that despite there being many paths that can present a risk for suicide, we know that our connection as school professionals to students can play a big role. It's tempting to write off kids that are pretty high risk as difficult to support because they may have difficult home lives or any other number of environmental factors causing problems such as a history of trauma or poverty. But our work with these kids is immensely important and can make a difference for these youth, whether we're aware of it or not. The relationships that we're cultivating with our students really do matter. And I think fostering student connectedness to schools can look different depending on your approach and the school that you're in. But some ideas include collaborative efforts between faculty and students, so maybe student government and clubs. It could involve students as consultants for policy and teaching, getting faculty and staff engaged outside of the classroom. But it can also be as simple as just having fun with a kid, even one who might be difficult for you to work with in other ways. These simple acts can play a huge role in preventing suicide. And of course, identifying and supporting students most at risk for suicide is critically important. And these previously built connections, the ones that we're talking about from like a universal perspective, can support improvement in crisis assessment and management when these actually do occur. And then these connections don't even end there. If students are hospitalized or experience a significant crisis, these connections can play a key role in their recovery as they return to schools. So teachers and school professionals in general just have so much pressure on them and have so many responsibilities. So one of the most uplifting takeaways from this research that I see is that this kind of intervention doesn't necessarily have to add work. It's something that most of us are already trying to do, and most teachers and school professionals are an expert in. It's likely that each person got into this field to begin with to engage with, support, and have fun with kids. So my hope is that this work, the findings from this work, will validate what folks are already doing to connect with kids in the schools and continue to encourage folks to do that fun and meaningful work.